Up next is Mr. Jonathan Leahey, the VP of our operations at Layered Superfood. He will shed light upon the topic Battle Decks, a potpourri keynote address. Our speaker, John, has canvassed the GSAF participants for questions on topics that were covered over the last 3 days. And he will be randomly selecting some of these questions and answering them in this next segment. Welcome him to the stage.
Am I live now? Can you hear me? Is my microphone on? Is that good? Oh my gosh, GSAF. It's late in the day. It makes it so difficult to talk to all of these top 100 global food innovators who, of course, are all in attendance. No one's gambling. No one's at the swimming pool. You know, speaking at the very end of the day makes me feel like an ugly baby. You've got to tie a pork chop around my neck just to get the dog to play with me. You know what I mean? So it's very, very difficult, to speak toward the end and keep everyone engaged. So I want to be sure before I start that the microphone controller, the MC, the person that needs to walk around with the mic is ready to move around, because the expectation, if you're still sitting here because you're dedicated people, can I hear from dedicated people, please? Hell yeah, thank you very much, is that I thought we would just do a review of the topics that we've seen throughout the past 3 days, and like a crazy person, I'm going to ask myself questions, then I'm going to answer the questions, then I'm going to ask you for your input. And if you don't have an answer, we're moving to the next question, machine gun style. That's why it's called Battle Decks. And when we go to the next question, it'll be another question, and I'll look for your input. If you don't answer the question, we'll go to the next question. And we're just going to keep going and going and going until we run out of time. Speaking of which, I don't have a clock up here, so can somebody do me a favor and run a 25-minute clock for me? Somebody. I'm looking. Thank you very much. If you just give me like a 3-minute warning or 5-minute warning, that'd be great. Okay, that sounds great. All right, so let's have some good times. Let's have a little bit of fun since we're coming to the end of the session. My name is John Leahey. You've heard me babbling and talking about AI and a whole bunch of number things, and I talk too much, and now's my last chance to shine. So why don't we get started and review some of the things that we talked about and have an interesting discussion, maybe back and forth. So let's start with the first rapid fire question. The first rapid fire question is, I don't see the slide, here we go, slide advancer. Remember Willie Pretorius? Willie Pretorius from South Africa? Very professorial. I think you should have given a speech maybe at Oxford or The Hague. If you don't remember, he was talking about a number of things in terms of food insecurity and how we have problems. But what he mentioned, and the question was that just shy of saying that the industrial food complex is responsible significantly and directly to the obesity and disease pandemic, he kind of stopped short and said, well, I'm no expert. I don't really want to say this, but he certainly intimated it. Am I right, people? He intimated it. So the question is, why shouldn't he have just stated the obvious? How much evidence do you need in terms of data to know that we have some very, very strong correlations? Now, correlation is not causation, but you saw his pictures. If you were awake, you saw his pictures. It showed as obesity rates went up, so did industrial food production, including junk food. But the most telling thing that he showed in that entire presentation was a picture. Does anybody remember the picture? It was a picture of sports spectators in 1970 that were nice and thin, looking fit, and spectators of today, super chunks like me. Now, here's the answer to the question. Yes, he should have stated the obvious. Is he afraid to be sued by the meat council like Oprah? I don't know, maybe, but his data was compelling. And as a recovering attorney, I can tell you, I would have taken any of that evidence into court and thrown that thing out on its tail. There is no question about the fact that we have a problem. Now, the answer to this question is not quite so obvious because industry wants to blame the individual. It's true, we all make individual choices. I make bad ones all the time, like dipping Snickers in gravy. Delicious. Delicious, right? Is it the right choice? But why do I fundamentally make those decisions? A, individual responsibility, but is that really the only factor? What about the fact that I grew up in the 1970s with a $2 billion marketing budget that the cereal companies had that my mother did not? So I'm constantly nagging, saying, need sugar. And then, of course, it becomes brain chemistry, and before you know it, we're just wolfing down all kinds of junk food. So there is an industry component, no doubt about it. On top of that, beyond marketing and other things, we just make choices based upon what's available. And the last speaker, of course, made an assumption that, we have to take what we get in some cases. So when there's not a lot of choice, you're forced into some inaction. I mean, we're the only country in the world that has people that are absolutely dying of starvation and dying of having nutritious foods, yet we're fat as hell. Now, tell me how that works. The evidence is overwhelming. Okay, so that's my answer to the first question. Input, ready to go? Who wants to have some input, questions, concerns, spitting of venom, disagreement? I'm ready, let's go. Anybody? Yes, sir.
In college, I did an article similar to this conversation where basically in the 50s, they came out with the TV dinner. And it was like, cooking bad, TV dinner good, real quick. Love the brownie that's in that thing, though. However, I am now trying to teach my people that cooking is good, and it can be easy, and it can be entertaining, it can be fun, it can bring the family together. I guess my input or my question to you is how can we do that as a group? Something that would be impactful, that would be engaging, because you're talking 40, 50 years of that being embedded into people's brains.
I don't have an easy answer to that question. And by the way, I'm not opposed to donuts. I'm not opposed to anything. I mean, look at me. I'm not opposed to any of these things. But if we're going to have a sea change, and remember yesterday I mentioned it's up to millennials who make fun of, they're the ones that have to change things. They're already changing their habits and changing their behaviors. So I don't have a fundamentally good answer to your question, but I do think that you've got to start with incremental changes. And I will say, if there's one benefit that has come out of this particular conference, a lot of the people here are new age thinkers. I don't mean new age in the sense of new age like we're going to be part of the new pyramid schemes or anything like that, or waiting for aliens to come invade the planet. I'm talking about people that are really at the cutting edge. A lot of startups are here. A lot of plant-based people are here. So I think there needs to be incremental change. So you can start with yourself. That's the first thing. The second thing I think is to maybe make more of this summit than just a summit. We need to start networking and sort of working together. So are there particular industry groups that we can join? Can we try to force change? There's a lot of industry change that's coming. So I don't think it's going to happen overnight. I don't even think we're going to be that successful, but if we could be partially successful, you're still talking about hundreds of thousands or millions of people in terms of lives that are at stake, as opposed to the rest of the billions that have to suffer. So I wish I had a better answer. If anyone else has an input or better answer, that'd be great. Anyone else? Going once? Going twice? Next question. Ben Pasternak, he spoke today, emphasized the role women have played throughout history in providing food to all of us in a healthy, beneficial way. So the question that I received was, what can we do to foster this as food seems to be moving in a healthier direction? Something that you just brought up. Well, first, put it in the hands of women. That's part of the answer to your question. The second thing, however, that I want to talk about is something that's a phenomenon that no one really addressed today or the past couple of days, and that is the really horrible impact that COVID has had on women, both in the United States and around the world. There's a report from the United Nations, it's called the COVID UN Women's Report, and they have estimated that the pandemic has pushed roughly 47 million women into extreme poverty, women and girls around the world. That is not exclusive to any particular place. It also includes millions of women in the good old USA. So the problem is that women in particular have been disproportionately impacted by COVID. So it's one thing to talk about platitudes and how great women are and how they contribute, but what can we do concretely to deal with this problem, especially in the richest country in the world? Anyone have any answers before I give you some? Well, one thing we need to think about is, first of all, why are women disproportionately affected? One reason is, if you look at employee statistics in the United States and the West, women in particular are disproportionately represented in entertainment, in food, and other service areas. And with the pandemic, many of them have been laid off. And also, despite what some jackass in Canada as professor says about women's ceiling, how they make as much money as men, not true, not true. Women make a lot less money than men. There is a glass ceiling. You can also look at the incontrovertible statistical evidence. There's some argument about that, but they're just parsing the numbers. There are lies, damn lies, and as one of our speakers says, statistics that you cannot rely on. So what can you do with women? Well, first of all, one thing we could do right away is just pay them more money. That's one thing you can do. That's good for retention. The second thing is support women in the workplace. And what I mean by that is women also disproportionately are in charge of child rearing, because despite really making changes in misogyny, we still have a female-dominated culture when it comes to raising children. So what can you do at the workplace? It's pretty easy. You've got to provide different services. You've got to provide childcare, and it's really a benefit that can actually be good for your company. The other thing that we need to think about is women also disproportionately give to a business what is called work without pay. So it's the kind of contributions they make that need to be compensated in some way, either by giving them levels of flexibility for informal work or trying to find a way to compensate them. So that's one thing we can do. Now, mostly it sounds like an economic decision, and that's probably because the primary factor is dealing with it in an economic way. All right, now, because you're good people, we still have women in the audience. Do we have any commentary from the women in the audience? Stand up for yourselves, sisters. This is why the WNBA is failing. We gave you the NBA and no one goes to the games. So now's your chance. Now's your chance to make a comment about this. Nobody? Yes. Let's hear it. Get the microphone there.
Hold on.
Microphone controller.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay. As a staffing and agency owner, that market is predominantly male. And can I just say, it's predominantly white male. I'm not a racist.
No, it's fine. Just a fact.
It's just a fact. And as a woman, I have to work 10 times harder when I get in front of male prospects. The majority of my clients are male. I have 2 female clients. But for the most part, when I do my business development and my prospects are men, one of 2 things happen. Because of COVID, I've done a lot of Zoom meetings and stuff, and I couldn't go out. But as things are starting to slowly change, even with my Zoom meetings, 2 things happen. Men look at me, and one, they think giving me a compliment is gonna get me into bed with them, number 1. Number 2, I think they don't fully think I know enough to be beneficial to them for what I do, but I look good. So there's 2 things that is a challenge as a woman, but I'm also contributing because what I do, I present candidates to help meet their need. So they have to get over that whole she's a female, and they're so used to seeing males, because I know I'm just as good as a guy, but you gotta give me a chance, and don't base it on what I look like. But unfortunately, as women, that's what still exists in 2021. Just wanted to say that.
No, excellent points. And I think, there should be a forum to talk about these things openly. We don't talk about social, sexual dynamics, but it is important because it is real and it is there, and maybe it's unspoken, but it's time to get out in the open. So it's a real problem. And if women are a disproportionate part of the food industry worldwide, then we've got to address it, because we're no longer talking about just sexism, which is terrible. We're talking about food insecurity. And that's the big issue. So it pays dividends across the board. Okay, next question. Christopher Knight. He was the operations director of Montana Specialty Mills. If you remember, he was talking about making canola oil and pressing things. He said that automation has allowed him to work with very few staff members. So what might have been in the past a shift that might have had 20, 30 people, he's running like 4 or 5 people, and when I talk to him in the hallway, he has sometimes 3 people. So the question there is, automation has allowed him to operate with a small staff, but here's something that we all need to consider, because we've had all these high-minded platitudes talking about food saving the world and how we're gonna do sous vide or we're gonna do plant-based. You know what? Someone or something has to make that stuff. And the someone or someone that has to make that stuff, when you scale it, is going to rely a lot on machinery. So the question when it comes to machinery, and we're not talking about that, is what do we do about having very short staff when things go wrong? So maintenance is becoming a big emphasis in food. It's not like it used to be when you had a giant staff. Now you need to put money and resources into your EMF team, engineering, maintenance, et cetera, facilities. And so how can we then think about this in an ethical way? I mean, is there an ethical situation with machines? Well, I told you yesterday that there's this idea where you look at machines like cobots, not robots, if you act carefully. But there is an ethical nature of just having regular old maintenance. So for instance, if I'm very careful and I take care of my machinery just like you would take care of your car and you fuel it up before it's empty, or you put oil in it before you need to worry about 10,000 or 12,000 miles. Why is that a good thing from an ethical standpoint? Anyone have an answer to that question? Well, from an ethical standpoint, if you have preventive maintenance, you have less breakdown. If you have breakdown, you have waste. So less waste means less impact on the environment. That's one thing. If you can get to the point where I told you yesterday in predictive environments with machine learning, you can have predictive maintenance, which means you can intervene. You can have your intervention before something goes wrong, because I'm telling you just anecdotally, in my experience with a lot of industries, one of the big problems they have is downtime, and downtime is wasteful. And downtime is wasteful not just because people are not being productive or machines are not being productive, it's because a lot of downtime will cause waste, stuff on the floor, stuff you got to throw out. So it's a big problem. So I do think we could probably have an entire seminar with just maintenance folks talking about just these ethical considerations and what they're doing about it to get ahead of it. So that may be a more boring kind of operational issue for us to talk about, but if anyone has a comment about that, I'll leave it at that before I go to the next question in this survey of what we've done the past 3 days. Okay, next question. Amanda McClernand talked today and discussed the importance of managing social media in a robust way. But one thing she did not talk about was in this era of short attention spans, especially like in the past presidency, which was shambolic, despite your side of the spectrum, we know that shambolic, tiny little tweets are very powerful, one way or the other, good or evil. I'm not going to state which side I'm on. Maybe you can infer, but you understand what I'm saying. So when it comes to social media posting, is there a sweet spot? Because, I know my 14-year-old is like all day on the phone, and she's probably looking at 25 to 30 things per minute to begin with. So in a short attention span time zone, what would be the sweet spot for a posting on social media? Anybody have any ideas? What do you think? I got some youngsters back there in the back that are waiting to do a panel discussion. Maybe as a warm-up, you can give us your insight on what you think people would pay attention to. Like if I wrote a treatise, or if I wrote War and Peace, would that be a good Instagram post?
Sorry, what? Say it again.
If I wrote a treatise like War and Peace, would that be a good Instagram post? Very detailed, all about my business. How's that going to work out?
Not great.
Tell me why.
I think what really captures people's attention nowadays, at least for me, is a lot of animated text, keywords that are really important. So if you're selling a lip balm, like something that pops up, my lips have never been more luscious or moisturized or super cheap, good for you, planet, sustainability. I think that's what captures my attention nowadays. I mean, you see it on Facebook too. You see like the blocky text on the top and the bottom, and it has like, I made $100 in one minute or something like that. I think that's kind of like where it is nowadays. But.
Yeah.
I mean, I learned this in college when I was taking a marketing class. I mean, the best way to do it if you're doing social media is like you have like a 5 to 7 second window, realistically speaking, to capture their attention. And anything more than that, they're just going to lose interest. And I mean, it's interesting. I actually read a cool article about like why like we're not reading books anymore. Like Lord of the Rings, that was such a big deal when it came out. And now apparently none of us are reading it anymore. And it's because it's like our attention spans have just, and this is obviously because of social media for the most part, have just deteriorated. I'm one too. I mean, I have the attention span of a chipmunk.
You're the market.
Yeah, yeah. I don't know. It's that 5 to 7 second window. Yeah.
Good point. Well, I'm no amateur. I just look like one. I did a little research here. So there are studies, and good studies, and here are the recommendations. Now, this is going to change tomorrow because, tomorrow you'll have a new technology. You won't like Instagram anymore or whatever it is. But when it comes to social media, for the most part, Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, whatever else there is, the recommendation in terms of text is no more than 121 characters. That was kind of the sweet spot in getting attention. That's pretty interesting if you think about it. 121 characters. I mean, should we start getting rid of vowels? Should we start, cramming words together like the Germans do, where, everything's just one giant word? It's something you have to think about because now every character is like unicorn blood, the most precious blood. So every character is like a drop of unicorn blood. And we're not just talking about thinking about words anymore. We're talking about thinking about compression and really delivering a message. In some ways, I think this might be the fix to my pretentious wife's problems with the way people speak. Because if you really need to really think about how you're going to present something in a cogent way, you're going to have to think about grammar. And you're going to have to think about even, the street language that we're going to use because you're going to have to compress it in such a small space. So 121 characters is what the studies show now. But there's another piece of this, which is you also want people to clickbait. So what do you think the recommendation is on the number of hashtags that you should leave? Because sometimes you'll see like 50 hashtags because people want to get attention, right? They want to draw things. The recommended number of hashtags, which I thought was high, was 4 to 9 hashtags. So 121 characters, 4 to 9 hashtags, and that's kind of what I was thinking about with this question coming away from Amanda's presentation. So short attention span is very big. And I'm sure she would have had an answer, but she bolted, and I was unable to ask her if she agreed with this assumption. But if anyone wants to follow up, she seemed to know what she's doing. At least I thought she did very, very well, so might be a good follow-up. Questions? Yes?
You're done.
I'm done.
Yes.
That's my 25 minutes?
Yes.
Okay, real quick. Last question. May I have one more question? Yes, I'm taking it.
Of course.
What's going on? Slide's not advancing. Oh, wait a second. Last question. Is a Pop-Tart a ravioli? That was one of the questions I received. Is a Pop-Tart a ravioli? Now, I'm going to take 1 minute of liberty here to finish this up. This is a relevant question. First of all, no, a Pop-Tart is not a ravioli. It has a shape like one. It certainly does. But why did I put this up here? I mean, it was a ridiculous question, but I think a fun one. But if you remember, Jonathan Netsky yesterday was talking about something that I think is quite interesting and makes this question relevant. One thing we don't consider when we offer new products and when we're talking about changes in industry is we fail to talk about operational definitions. And if you don't start with an operational definition, when does my tolling start? When does it end? What is a whole food? If I'm talking about what's going to go into an ingredient package, I better be sure that I know what my market is and very specific about operational definitions. So this is really not that silly of a question. Of course, this is facetious, but it really does beg other questions that we're all facing, all of us in this industry, which is, I don't know anymore what's a natural food, what's not a natural food. There are so many organic bogus labels. I can get a bogus label anywhere I want. I could put together so many different appellations that this becomes very confusing. So operational definitions, I think, is a great place to start with all of your staff talking about what's in, what's out, and it will define characteristics for you all the way from nutritional information to the way you're going to run your business. And I will say that while a Pop-Tart is not a ravioli, I'll give you a definitive answer on something else. A hot dog is a sandwich. Thanks, everybody. I appreciate it.